Hello, and welcome to day 6 of Mindful Living Week. My name is Kaylee Isaacs. I'm the founder of the Awake Network and the producer of Mindful Living Week. And in this session, we'll be exploring how to bring mindfulness into the workplace with Parneet, who is a Harvard-trained physician and the Chief Science Officer at Wisdom Labs, which is a San Francisco-based company building wiser workplaces using the science of mindfulness, resilience, and compassion. Parneet, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Kaylee.
Maybe to start off, we could just talk a little bit about what mindfulness is and how it could be helpful to us in the workplace.
So that's a huge question. We could spend a whole day on this topic. But whenever I talk about mindfulness, especially with audiences in the workplace, I like to explain it giving a couple of different perspectives. So the first is I draw attention to the original meaning or the root of the meaning of the word mindfulness, which is simply to remember. And reminding folks that, being mindful in any moment means remembering to keep our breath, body, our thoughts and emotions in mind in each moment. As much as possible. And so sort of moving away from the tendency of our minds to be stuck either thinking about the past or projecting into the future. And the whole point of doing that is that when we're able to remember to keep those things in mind, then we can bring ourselves fully to the present moment and see clearly at what's happening. And then remembering also how we've shown up in those kinds of situations in the past and whether or not that was a good way to show up, and then using that information to inform our response in the present. So that's sort of my definition of mindfulness. And so one way to remember, especially if you're at work and say you're in the middle of a team meeting and you want to say, hey, am I being mindful right now or not? You can sort of use these 2 points. You could first think about, am I paying attention fully? So am I not only bringing myself to the present moment, but what is the quality of my attention? So is my focus and attention kind of constricted or constrained? Or can I bring attention with a sense of curiosity and openness and kindness? And the second check-in is in this meeting, as I'm paying attention to the people who are around me and I'm having this conversation, am I able to respond skillfully with whatever may be arising in the present moment? And I may not like what's arising. So if there's a difficult conversation going on in the team meeting, developing the ability to not judge what's coming up, so accepting it in that sense, but then being very discerning about the way that I respond.
Thank you. And as we've been exploring through this event so far, one way to cultivate mindfulness could be through regular meditation practice. And I'd be interested in hearing your perspective from your research and your work on how we might also be able to cultivate this skill of mindfulness through our actual activity at the workplace.
Yeah, so that's this is a question that comes up all the time. So when Wisdom Labs, we pride ourselves in honing our programming in organizations in a multimodal way, which means that we understand that becoming mindful is a practice. It doesn't happen simply when you attend a workshop or if you read a book or watch a video. It takes much more than that. And so it takes the meditation practice for sure. The practice is essential for all of the changes that we know that the research is showing that happens in different networks in our brain. So that is key. But then just like exercise, you can, in order to be fit, you can go to the gym or run or have some kind of regular exercise practice. But then you can also stay active throughout your day. You can take the stairs at work, you can work at have a standing desk at work and so on. Similarly, when it comes to mindfulness, you can think of your meditation practice as sort of going to the gym for your brain and your mind training. But then throughout the day, you can build what we like to call at Wisdom Labs mindful hacks into each part of your workday. So I can give you some examples. And the first one might be when you're checking your phone. So we check our phone about 150 times a day on average. And we can co-opt that moment when we sort of log into our phone to take a deep breath. So that's 150 deep breaths built right into your day without having to allocate extra time. Another thing might be how we conduct meetings. And this is something that we use at Wisdom Labs all the time, is how do you start a meeting has a huge impact on the quality of the conversations that emerge. And so we've developed this habit of taking 3 minutes. We have instructors on our team that can lead meditations, but for other folks in different organizations, it's completely okay just to take 3 minutes of silence, or to play 3 minutes of a guided audio meditation that you might find online. And what that does is really, from a very practical standpoint, is in all organizations, the common issue is we have back-to-back meetings, we're constantly running, we're frazzled, we're feeling really overwhelmed. And just even taking a minute or two for pause and for silence helps us to start to bring our mind away from that fight or flight stress response, and just allows the body to settle in to the present moment, and gives us just that little extra period of time where we can sort of come back into more of our thinking brain and our prefrontal cortices, which is a part of the brain where we usually have our better responses, rather than sort of reacting from our emotional brain.
Could you tell us a little bit about how mindfulness might also help us work with stress at the workplace and what the research is saying about that?
Sure. So when it comes to stress in the workplace, unfortunately, we're not doing that well. We know that the healthcare costs and the fallout from stress-related chronic disease is really high. And not just from the chronic lifestyle diseases, but direct, other costs that show up in terms of presenteeism or absenteeism or our productivity. And they're upwards of $300 billion a year in the US. We also know that more and more employees are less engaged at work. And the Gallup surveys show that only about 13% of people really show up at work fully connected to what they're doing. So what we notice, especially when we work with different organizations, is this constant we hear this over and over again, that people are overwhelmed. There's too much to do. There's too little time. Technology is becoming very distracting for folks. And it's really hard to keep up with everything. So when we try to keep up with many different things, our common tendency is to multitask. But from a conscious brain point of view, we also know that we can't multitask. So what we end up doing is we switch from one task to the other very quickly. And we pay a price for that at work. So it reduces our productivity by 40%. We take twice as long to finish something. We make 30% more errors, which then obviously adds to that underlying stress again. And so there's this sense of greater anxiety, of course, due to factors not related to mindfulness or to a particular workplace per se, but sort of just this general trend that we're seeing at work in terms of jobs, automation, artificial intelligence. What will the future of work be like? Are we going to lose our jobs? So there's sort of like this tension globally, anyways, around work. And then when you add sort of the stresses of the workload in many workplace situations, that compounds it. Then you have technology. And then, of course, I think all of us, not just millennials, all of us are looking for a greater sense of meaning and purpose. Those of us who are lucky to have the opportunity to reflect on such questions, we are looking to contribute in meaningful ways to life and to others. And often that can get in the way when you're sort of just going through the motions at work. So I hope that gives a sort of picture of the state of affairs when it comes to stress in the workplace. And the alarming thing for me is definitely the rise in healthcare costs related to chronic diseases. So rates of obesity and diabetes and heart disease, mood disorders are rising every day. And stress plays a huge part. It's not the only factor, but it plays a huge part in these ailments. And then we also have, burnout rates are through the roof. The last time I checked, the average burnout rate was 50% across industries, which is stunning. So unfortunately, we seem to be working harder, but we're not feeling connected at work.
And What is the research showing about how mindfulness might be able to help with this?
So what we know is, so mindfulness, so the first thing to keep in mind is whenever you apply practices like mindfulness in the workplace is firstly, it takes time. It takes time and consistent practice, and incorporating these practices into the culture of an organization before you can start to see some of the benefits. What we know is that uh, organizations who take this on wholeheartedly, which means that they invest in ongoing programming, whether that's in-person programs or apps or other digital solutions or communities of practice uh, uh, to enable mindfulness in the workplace, they start to see these benefits, especially when it comes to navigating stress more effectively and building resilience. So I can share some of the results that we've seen with our work in organizations. When we do one of the things that we do is 5-week long what we call learning labs, and this is an opportunity for a group at work to engage with 1 hour per week with a Wisdom Labs instructor, and this can be done in person or virtually. And then throughout the week, they have access to our digital app, which is again specifically designed for the workplace, mindfulness in the workplace. And we also have an ambassador program, which is sort of a community of practice. So once a week, a volunteer from the group can come together and say, hey, we're practicing, at 3:30 on Wednesday every week. And we provide the content. So they literally just have to do a plug and play on their laptops. So we make it very easy for them. And this is very important. Making that access and making it really easy to practice at work is very key to the success of programs. And so when we've looked at the results pre and post of these 5-week learning labs, we've seen up to 18% improvements in the self-reported levels of stress resilience and improvements in levels of mindfulness and compassion. So we're really happy with those trends. And I can also talk about a very early study that we did with biomarkers, if you're interested. So we did the study at an advertising agency, and it was a 12-week long engagement. And we measured, pre and post levels of, we took their blood and we looked at the levels of a particular set of genes. And these genes code for inflammation in the body, and they code for immunity in the body. And we know from previous research in mindfulness is these practices help to reduce inflammation and they help to boost immunity. And so we thought, okay, let's try this out in the workplace and see, the folks in the workplace do not have the benefit of going to a retreat center or investing many, many hours a day. And we wanted to see if we could replicate those results in real time. And we were pleasantly surprised. We found out that after 12 weeks of this kind of programming, the trends, there was a statistically significant improvement in the levels of gene expression such that inflammation went down and immunity improved, which is huge. But I also want to point out that that's a very early finding, and we're looking forward to doing that with many more folks so that we can show more definitive connections and causation. But it was very encouraging to see that early trend.
Mm. As we're seeing that mindfulness can have some positive effects in the workplace to help mitigate things like stress, how do we balance what might be happening in the external situation where you might be in perhaps an unhealthy workplace where the demands are a bit overboard, or it might be time to leave, or there is an employer or a coworker that might need to be related with directly rather than taking on the responsibility just internally for taking care of your own stress levels, but also acting outwardly. Could you share with us a little bit of your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up, Kaylee, because I think that's really important. Not just when it comes to mindfulness. I think when it comes to developing healthy habits in any area of your life, we have to realize that personal responsibility is important, but our behaviors are always a result of our interactions with our environment. So that's our mechanical environment, our physical environment, and our social environment, so the people around us. And this is key when we think about, so at Wisdom Labs, when we think about what does a wiser workplace look like, we think about wise leadership as a piece of that puzzle. And this is exactly to your point where you can do as much mindfulness practice as you want, and you can hold your networks in the brain. But if you're constantly surrounded by either a culture that does not give you permission to practice, or that is not aligned with your values, or where the workload is really unbearable and unrealistic, there's only so far. You can only go so far with your own particular practice. And this is when we need a systems change. In fact, there's a researcher at Stanford, his name is Jeffrey Pfeffer, and he's in the organizational development department there. And he's written a book, I haven't read it yet, but it's called Dying for a Paycheck. But one of the main premises of his work, where he studies stress in organizations, is that the workplace is actually the fifth leading cause of death, according to his calculations, which is, we just need to take a pause and just think about that. Wow. And he points to the fact that it's all about the systems around us that need to be addressed. And so our take is that, how can mindfulness help to begin to change the systems around people? Well, in order to do that, definitely, employees need to be aware of that. They need to talk to their leaders about some of the changes that they want to enforce. But I think more importantly, it needs to come from leadership itself as well. And this is why we really like to connect with, the C-suite and other leadership in an organization, and have them experience, what is mindfulness? How does it, how does it change my thinking? Because one of the key benefits of continued practice is the effects that it has on our pro-sociality networks, which means that you start to sort of, move the lens outward away from yourself and start to say, oh, what is the impact of my actions? How is the well-being of others related to my own well-being? What are those interconnections? How can I be more empathic and compassionate? And I think that's what we need. We need more and more empathic and compassionate leadership. And it's those leaders then are then able to sort of step back and say, oh, wait a minute, let me take a look at the systems that I've created in my organization, and something needs to shift and change there. So I think that's definitely a huge piece that we need to keep in mind. And so definitely, involving leaders as much as we can in this conversation is very important.
Thank you for that. And on the topic of change, whether we're looking at creating internal change, maybe with some of our own habits, or creating change at our organizations, or just reaching an important goal at work, are there ways that mindfulness can help us in changing course or changing habits in our lives?
Absolutely. And there's some really great research from folks like Judson Brewer and others who have shown that what mindfulness does in the brain is that it can help us break the habit loop. So the habit loop, for folks who may not be familiar with that, is our subconscious way of reacting to triggers in our life. So a trigger happens, it prompts an immediate response or a reaction, and there's some kind of payout or reward from that particular behavior, which then reinforces the loop. So for example, I'm stressed, I reach for a cookie makes me feel good, so the next time I'm stressed, I reach for the cookie again. And these loops are obviously built depending on how we grew up, our childhood experiences, the response that we got from our caregivers, and just sort of our general environment as well. And over time, these loops get really ingrained, so that as an adult, we then show up in situations and react in ways that we may not think about consciously, but which may not be very helpful for us. So whether that's a behavior related to not eating well, or not taking care of ourselves through exercise, or not sleeping well, or the ways that we respond to stress in our lives. So what happens with mindfulness then is that through the effects of the networks that connect our thinking prefrontal cortex to our more emotional, our subconscious emotional centers. So when you strengthen those networks, what happens is that when you're in the moment of being triggered, that moment where you feel you go into that fight or flight mode, you're better able to take a pause in those moments, or you're better able to take a step back and just become aware of the fact that, oh, I'm, that triggered me, that stressed me out right now. And being able to catch yourself in that moment means that you have a little more time for your the wiser parts of your brain to come online and to say, okay, wait a minute, let me just say, the last time I ate that cookie when I was stressed, it felt good in the moment, but it made me feel really lousy a few hours later, and I don't like what it's doing to the rest of my body. So is there a different choice that I can make in the present moment? And maybe I can just step outside and go for a walk, or maybe call a friend and talk about how stressed I'm feeling. So mindfulness has that ability to then become the foundation of creating these healthy habits, because you get better and better of catching yourself in that moment of feeling triggered and making different choices that are better for you. And the research, shows that as well. So people who are mindful have been shown to be more likely to stick to an exercise program or to eat better. And they have also been shown to be more likely to respond to the wellness messaging that's very important in workplaces. Workplaces have all of these wellness programs, but often adopting or participating in these wellness programs is a huge obstacle. But what we know now is that, the more mindful you are, the more likely you are to respond to those messages. Because at the end of the day, you realize, hey, this is for my benefit, and I want to feel good and take care of myself. So absolutely, mindfulness can become a foundation for a lot of the behavior change in an organization and in your personal life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Could you walk us through that a little bit? If so, say someone at home has a goal that they'd like to achieve or a habit they'd like to change, whether it's that they'd like to sit a little bit of meditation each morning, or maybe not check their cell phone first thing when they wake up. What are some of the steps that someone might be able to take to use a mindful approach to make that change?
Sure. So let's pick one thing. What was the first thing? Was it just like establishing a mindfulness habit, or?
Yeah, sure. If they want to start a daily meditation practice.
Great. So I think the first thing to start, and this is beyond mindfulness, this is sort of looking at behavior change and how we can make or choose goals more effectively. The first is to just connect with your intention. Why do I want to meditate in the first place? And a great question to ask is just keep asking why to all the answers that come up till you really get to the root of what makes you connect with your deepest motivation or your deepest intention. And because motivation is really fickle, motivation goes up and down. We have various conflicting motivations throughout our day. And so the goal of thinking about your intention is just to sort of connect with something that is emotionally charged for you and that is meaningful for you. So why am I meditating? Because I want to be less stressed. Okay, great. Why do you want to be less stressed? Because so that I can do better at work. Why do you want to do better at work? So that I can give back to my family. Ooh, that's emotionally charged. Or I want to be an entrepreneur and I have this great idea, and doing well at work means that I'll get that much closer to realizing that dream. So now you have that sort of juice of, okay, that's why I want to meditate. So if you can have your subconscious brain connect with this emotionally charged conscious goal, then it's more likely to be a little more sticky. So that's the first thing. So now we've established, okay, that's why I want to meditate. The next thing is, okay, do I know how to meditate? Right. So the next piece is the skill building of any kind of goal. So if I don't, then let's figure out what is the best way for me to learn how to meditate. So that might be using an app, that might be, going to a retreat center, whatever the case might be. So how can I acquire the skills of the particular practice? And then the third piece is to actually, establish a habit, but also to optimize your environment that will make that habit stick. So if I'm meditating, can I start really small? So let's forget about, meditating for 30 minutes a day. Let's start with a minute. And okay, I can do that. I can meditate for 1 minute a day. When is the best time? So maybe it's like first thing in the morning when I wake up, I want to just sit for a minute. Maybe it's in the afternoon because I know after lunch, that's a good time for me to regroup. Or maybe it's the last thing at night. So picking a moment in the day that makes sense for you, and then starting small. And then, like I said, optimizing your environment. So maybe you need to set up a reminder on your phone that, you know, it's time to meditate. Maybe it's setting up, hanging out with a community of like-minded friends. So figuring out who at work wants to meditate and meditating together. There's huge power, as you're well aware, of community of practice. So can you meditate with a friend and make that sort of your time for connecting with one another, but also developing this new habit. So those are just some of the things that you can keep in mind while starting a new habit.
Thanks. I think that's a great for anyone that is interested in starting a daily meditation practice, but also just as an example how to establish any new habit.
Yes.
And so in the workplace, there can often be challenges that come up, whether with employers or other coworkers. Could you speak a little bit to how we might be able to relate better with the challenges that come up in our everyday work lives?
Wow, that's a huge one, right? This is something that each of us can relate to really well, because it happens every day, a lot of the times. So I think going back to our practice is key. So I cannot overemphasize the importance of sitting every day to practice, because that is what is bringing about those changes in your brain networks. That is sort of like the off the field practice that will make you show up better on the field. And it's just like any athlete has to put in those hours of practice outside of the game. Similarly, when I'm doing my 10 minutes in the morning of sitting practice, then when I'm in a meeting or I'm having a difficult conversation with a colleague is when I am able to, without thinking about it, be more conscious and intentional with my conversation with that person. So, a common thing that comes up is, say you're having some kind of conflict with a colleague and you're not seeing eye to eye on a project. There's obviously many different ways you can address this, but one mindful way might be to just, first of all, even before you have the conversation with a colleague, is to just take your own time and sit and reflect on what's going on, and trying to sort of put yourself in their shoes and think about, why is it that they are showing up the way that they are? And so trying to be as objective as we can. So one way is to put yourself in their shoes. Another way might be just, if there was a third party who was observing our interactions before, what might they have to say? And what is my responsibility? What am I bringing to the table that might be contributing to them showing up the way that they are? So trying to get a very sort of as objective as possible picture of what might be going on. And then the second question is thinking about, not just the facts of what happened. So, there was this project and things didn't work out, and then he said, she said, and that's okay. But also thinking about what's at stake. What is at stake in this conversation? And a lot of the times, difficult conversations can bring up our deeply rooted, long-standing issues with self-image and identity. It can bring up a lot of our insecurities for both parties. So if there's a way that we can enter the conversation putting that issue of self-identity to rest, or making or calming that part of both of our brains, then it's more likely that the conversation will lead to a fruitful end. So what does that mean? So for example, say I'm a manager and I'm giving some feedback to somebody on my team, and it's not, they didn't live up to my expectations, and I need to give them this very critical feedback. Based on my previous conversations, I know that particular person might respond in a way that may not be totally constructive. So maybe so once I have all of the facts related to the project itself and what went wrong and what didn't live up to my expectations, maybe I can start the conversation with that person, reassuring them that, this has nothing to do with, your your overall competence or who you are as a person, or your job is not at stake here, but I'm really trying to understand, based on your previous performance, I know that you're really up for you've done amazing work before, and I'm just trying to understand what went wrong here. So basically trying to right from the get-go establishing the fact that their job is not at stake, or we're not going against, it's not some, they are good enough, we're not trying to criticize who they are as a person, we're merely trying to solve this project or this problem at work. So if we can come from a place of greater understanding, that is usually very helpful. Yeah, so that's sort of I hope that was a useful example of how we can come at conflict situations a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a practice that you could guide us through that would help us to experience that a little bit?
Sure. So this practice is called Just Like Me, and it's a way for us to connect with sort of our sense of shared identity and what we have in common with people that we don't see eye to eye with. So if you'd like, please go ahead and sit up in a way that's alert yet relaxed, and close your eyes. And make sure both your feet are planted firmly on the floor to help stabilize you. Make sure your spine is straight but not rigid, and the front of your belly is soft. And as we begin this practice, I'd like you to bring to mind somebody at work or somebody in your life that you don't see eye to eye with. And I'd like you to hold their image in your mind and repeat these phrases after me. This person has a mind and body just like me. This person has thoughts, feelings, and emotions just like me. This person has experienced physical pain at some point in their lives, just like me. This person has experienced emotional suffering in their lives, just like me. This person has experienced anger, disappointment, sadness, and fear, just like me. This person has felt insecure and frightened at some point in their lives, just like me. This person wishes to be happy and healthy, just like me. This person longs for love and connection, just like me. And now continuing to hold this person's image in mind, let's send them some wishes of goodwill and compassion. May this person have access to the resources that they need to be successful in their lives. May this person be happy and healthy in their lives. May this person feel safe and secure in their lives. May this person experience love and connection in their lives, because this person is a human being just like me. Now letting go of the image of this person and remembering that you can always reconnect with a sense of connection at any point during your day. You can go ahead and take a couple of slightly deeper breaths at your own pace. And whenever you're ready, you may open your eyes and rejoin this conversation.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that practice with us and for your time today. As we come to a close, if there were one thing that you'd like folks at home watching to remember from today, what would it be?
I would just say, see if you can connect in each moment and think about this phrase, how can I be kind today?
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who is watching. Take care.